Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a real-life medical thriller, the story of a virus that emerged from the shadows of the African rainforest to become literally one of the most feared pathogens in human history. Up to 90%. Let that sink in for a second. That is the maximum mortality rate of this unseen antagonist. Up to 9 out of every 10 people who contract the deadliest strain of this virus simply do not survive. It's a catastrophic legacy, one that absolutely shook the scientific community to its core. All right, let's jump into part 1, the silent killer. We're talking about hemorrhagic fever.
So first things first, we need to understand what this devastating pathogen actually does to you. Ebola is what's known as a viral hemorrhagic fever. And look, this isn't just a really bad flu, it's a severe multi-organ syndrome. The virus basically goes in and systematically attacks the body's vascular system. It damages your blood vessels so severely that it often results in catastrophic internal bleeding. It's a clinical nightmare, literally causing the body's systems to just leak and eventually collapse.
Now, if we look at the family tree, Ebola belongs to the Filoviridae family. This is broken down into 5 distinct species: Sudan, Bundibugyo, Tai forest, Reston, and Zaire. But I want you to focus specifically on that last one, the Zaire Ebola virus. Why? Because this is the deadliest of the bunch. It's the one responsible for that staggering 90% mortality rate we just talked about. Without a doubt, it's one of the most dangerous pathogens on the planet. So where did it actually come from? Well, humanity first met this killer back in 1976. Over in this small village of Yambuku in the Congo, which sits right along the Ebola River, people started dying from this mysterious, horrific disease. And at the exact same time, a concurrent outbreak was ravaging Sudan. The global scientific community was totally blindsided. They ended up naming this brand new terror after the river where it first surfaced, Ebola. For decades after that, scientists were scrambling, hunting for the origin of the virus. Like, where does it hide between outbreaks? The answer, as it turns out, was hiding right above them in the canopy, African fruit bats. These flying foxes are the natural, hidden reservoir for the virus. They carry it, but the wild thing is, they don't actually get sick from it. The whole tragedy gets set in motion when a human either eats or even just handles an infected bat. Boom. That single point of contact is all it takes to spark an outbreak.
Moving on to part 2, anatomy of a killer. Let's look at its spread and progression.
Okay, there is a ton of misinformation out there about this, so let's clear up a massive misconception right off the bat. Ebola is not airborne. You can't catch it just by breathing the same air as someone who's infected. But it is overwhelmingly contagious through direct contact with infected bodily fluids. We're talking blood, sweat, vomit, urine. In fact, just touching a loved one during traditional burial rituals has been enough to transmit the disease. It's heartbreaking, really. A single grieving embrace can literally be fatal. And here is how that clinical dread unfolds inside the body. It starts off with an incubation period, just hiding in the background for anywhere from 2 to 21 days. You feel totally fine. You have no idea you're even infected. Then, bam, these sudden deceptive flu-like symptoms hit you. High fever, severe headache, muscle pain. But trust me, it's not the flu. As the days pass, the virus triggers massive internal hemorrhaging. Your liver and kidneys start to fail. Ultimately, the organs completely shut down. The progression is just as rapid as it is terrifyingly visceral.
Which brings us to part 3, the 2014 global crisis. An unprecedented disaster. What initially started in rural West Africa absolutely exploded into an unprecedented disaster across Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. Look at these numbers. More than 28,000 people were infected, and over 11,000 people died in a single outbreak. It got so bad that the World Health Organization had to step in and declare an international public health emergency. The sheer scale of this devastation was something the modern world had just never seen before. And because of global travel, this localized epidemic very quickly morphed into a global crisis. For the very first time, Ebola spread to the West, hitting places like Texas and Spain. Practically overnight, the visual landscape of the world shifted to people in hazmat suits and thermal screenings at every airport. Quarantine centers were popping up rapidly. And alongside the actual biological epidemic, we experienced an infodemic, just this massive wave of global media hysteria and social media panic. The entire world was on edge.
Now, let's talk about part 4, heroes on the front line, the incredible bravery we witnessed. The people who honestly had the most reason to be terrified were the ones who stepped closest to the fire. We're talking about Doctors Without Borders, WHO staff, and local nurses working these grueling 10-hour shifts
fully zipped up in PPE suits, practically suffocating in 40 degrees Celsius heat. And tragically, over 500 healthcare workers sacrificed their own lives fighting this outbreak. They knew the immense risk, and you know what? They stayed anyway.
You really have to remember that for decades, humanity had absolutely no medical cure for this virus. Zero. Our only shields were these basic, but incredibly rigorous protocols. I mean, things like avoiding bodily fluids, strict and absolutely perfect use of PPE, quarantining the sick, relentless contact tracing, modifying deeply ingrained cultural burial practices, and rolling out massive community education. These simple, completely low-tech measures were literally the only way to save thousands of lives.
But then came Part 5, the vaccine breakthrough. Science counters.
It's true what they say, right? Crisis drives innovation. After decades of having almost no viable treatments, the 2014 crisis acted as this massive catalyst. It flooded research pipelines with some much-needed funding. Scientists working in high-security BSL-4 labs all around the globe just went into overdrive, accelerating clinical trials for experimental drugs like ZMapp, remdesivir, and Inmazeb. Global cooperation was suddenly moving at light speed.
And thankfully, all that effort finally, triumphantly paid off. In 2019, history was made. The FDA officially approved RVSV-Zebov, manufactured by Merck. It was the world's very first Ebola vaccine. A 43-year reign of terror was finally met with a massive scientific counterpunch. And then, just 2 years later, in 2021, Johnson & Johnson introduced a second vaccine. Science had finally given us a way to protect humanity from the 90% killer. Finally, Part 6, Lessons for the Future. A global transformation. The biggest takeaway here is that the 2014 outbreak fundamentally and permanently changed our global health infrastructure. It taught us, the hard way, that health security is no longer just an isolated local responsibility. The tragedy really forced the world to build a coordinated shield. We're talking about strengthening health systems in vulnerable nations, creating highly advanced disease surveillance networks, establishing rapid response teams, and completely overhauling how the World Health Organization handles international emergencies. Ultimately, science alone wasn't the only victor against Ebola. As the quote goes, knowledge is the weapon, vigilance is the shield, unity is the answer. Because at the end of the day, it was human cooperation, community resilience, and a deep sense of shared global responsibility that finally stopped the virus in its tracks. As we wrap up this explainer, we're left with a pretty critical thought to chew on. Ebola definitely showed us our vulnerabilities, but it also showed us our immense strength when we actually unite. So ask yourself, when the next unseen threat inevitably emerges from the shadows, will we be ready to stand together? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and stay curious.